Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 246, Family Reunion. What are you doing? Marcus looked at Nathan angrily. How could his son talk to him like that? Don't be angry with him. We must let our son have his own opinions, Marian said as she tried to keep the peace between her husband and son. Nathan, you should be polite to your father. You mustn't speak to him like that in the future. Nathan sneered lightly. He didn't pay much attention to his mother's words. Nathan, what are you thinking? You don't seem that worried about Alex. Do you have a plan to deal with him? Marian was quite familiar with Nathan's character. Nathan glanced at Marcus and said, Mom, you're smart, unlike some people who are so narrow-minded. Nathan wasn't at all concerned when he saw that Marcus was glaring at him. He looked at Marian and asked, Mom, are Alex's parents back? Not yet, but I'm sure they'll both come to your grandfather's birthday party tomorrow night, Marian asked. Why do you want to know? You'll find out tomorrow. Something's going to happen at the party that will finally show my grandfather what Alex is really like, and that I should be his favorite grandson. Nathan imagined his cousin's embarrassment when he carried out his plan at the party. He felt very confident Alex wouldn't be a problem for much longer. Alex's parents informed him over the phone that they were on their way to the family estate, and that they expected to arrive an hour before the birthday party. They were very excited to see him. They had heard a few days previously that Alex's restrictions had been lifted, and that they would finally be allowed to visit with him properly for the first time in 7 years. The family mansion was an ancient building constructed by the ancestors of the Ambrose family. It had more than 200 years of history. All the important family events were held there. At 7 o'clock that evening, Alex and Nellie stepped into the beautiful entranceway that led into the great hall where the birthday banquet was to be held. There were already several hundred people in the hall. Everyone who mattered to the Ambrose family was there. The majority of them were family members. The rest were outsiders like Ken Stokes, who held important positions within the family. They were all chatting and laughing together. The butler who was announcing guests as they arrived declared, Alex Ambrose has arrived. Alex was instantly surrounded by people asking him questions, including several of his aunts, uncles, and cousins. Alex, you're back, commented one of his uncles. I was worried you were dead, said a cousin. Alex, have the past 7 years been terrible for you? Asked an aunt. Nellie and the 4 girls of the Moon Society were pushed aside. Although the people surrounding Alex were relatives, he didn't feel particularly close to any of them. He knew that most of them really only cared about themselves and acted in their own best interests. However, he greeted them all politely. For 7 years, Alex had been so lonely and in need of the warmth of his family. But after only 20 minutes, he had said hello to everyone around him and returned to sit with Nellie. Then he heard someone saying loudly, Alex, I missed you so much. He looked up and saw a tall and handsome man heading toward him. It was his half-brother, Justin Ambrose. As soon as Justin reached him, he gave Alex a bear hug. He held him tightly and didn't seem to want to let him go. "Careful, you'll break a rib," Alex said with a laugh. Justin whispered in Alex's ear, "Alex, I know it was really hard for you to make the decision to give up looking for Debbie. I know that you're very bitter about it. After your 7 years of poverty training, I personally think that the family should have more respect for your choices. No matter what decision you make, you know that I'll always be on your side." Alex understood what Justin was trying to say, and he was very moved. He felt lucky to have such a loyal half-brother. Justin had heard about the restrictions on Alex being extended. He knew that if Alex had continued to pursue Debbie, it would have been very detrimental to his career and to his future within the Ambrose family. Justin slowly released Alex and looked him directly in the face. Alex saw that his eyes had welled up with tears. He patted Justin's shoulder and said, "How are you? You're crying. There are so many people here. You should be ashamed of yourself." Justin rubbed his eyes, gave Alex a playful shove, and said, "Who said I was crying? Don't spread rumors. I just had something in my eye." The 4 Moon Girls were moved by Justin's emotions and smiled. Then, Justin noticed the 4 beautiful girls, and his eyes widened with instant infatuation. He asked, "Is one of you my brother's girlfriend?" The 4 girls blushed. Celeste bowed her head and said, "We're just friends of Mr. Alex. Don't be silly." Alex shook his head and smiled. "Alex, there you are at last," a rickety old man said as he shuffled over to Alex, accompanied by Ken. The man looked to be in his late 70s, with a heavily wrinkled face, and was wearing a brown suit. Alex instantly recognized him as Mark Stevens, his family's butler. He said, "Mr. Stevens, please sit down and I'll get you a drink." He felt emotional when he saw Mark. He helped him to a chair and fetched him a cup of tea. He had not seen Mark for 7 years, and his old butler seemed to have aged excessively. Mark had always cared for Alex, and he felt heartbroken to see him so frail. Another announcement came from the door. "Gideon and Flora Ambrose are here." A gentle-looking middle-aged man in a suit walked in, accompanied by a beautiful woman of a similar age. They were Alex's parents. "Mom! Dad!" Alex called out, and rushed over to them with tears in his eyes. Episode 247. Alex sees his parents. Alex hugged Gideon and Flora. They had not seen each other for 7 years. Finally, they were reunited. Flora hugged Alex, rested her head on his shoulder, and cried silent tears. Gideon was full of joy and also felt very emotional. He put one hand on his son's back, and with the other hand, he gently patted Flora's back. He said softly, "Why are you crying like this? Finally, you're reunited with your son. You should feel happy. Stop crying." Alex looked at his parents with red eyes and said softly to Flora, "Mom." "Oh, my wonderful son," Flora said. It meant more to her to hear her son calling her Mom than all the money in the world. "Dad," Alex said as he looked at Gideon. "Ah, son," Gideon answered, and his chest filled with love. Even he felt an impulse to cry. He blinked back his tears and looked at Alex. He said, "Okay, Even I'm feeling emotional at my age. I just can't help it. Alex's eyes were red. He smiled and said, Dad, are you trying not to cry? Gideon was embarrassed and quickly wiped his eyes with his hand, saying, I had something in my eye. Justin came over, smiled, and said to Gideon, You and I have the same problem. It was very dusty out there, and we both got some grit in our eyes. The people around him laughed. Flora was perceptive and understood that Justin must have already used this excuse for crying. She chuckled. Gideon also understood, and he smiled at Justin. They sat at a table, chatting and laughing together and feeling very relaxed. Although Alex introduced the 4 girls as his friends, only Gideon and Nellie believed him. Flora thought, No wonder he's given up on Debbie. He's found 4 new girls to follow him around. They're very pretty, but I don't think they're from decent families. I hope that he doesn't get too attached to any of them, or we'll have the same problems again with the family. Another cry came from the door. Marcus Ambrose and his family are here. 3 members of Nathan's family entered the hall. Nathan was also a strong contender to be the successor as the head of the family. He had finished his poverty training a few months previously and had returned to the Ambrose family. His grandfather Lincoln was very impressed with Nathan and had already allocated him several large business transactions, which he had completed competently. Also, the North American area that his parents headed was an important source of revenue. For this reason, Nathan's parents were held in great esteem by the rest of the family. Most other family members knew that Nathan and Alex were the 2 grandchildren most valued by the head of the family, and that one of them would probably take over from Lincoln in the future. However, Nathan had a distinct advantage over Alex. He had returned from his poverty training earlier than Alex, who had delayed his own return due to personal matters. While Alex had been trying to sort things out with Debbie, Nathan had already taken the opportunity to get himself involved in the family business. As when Alex arrived, many people gathered around to greet Nathan and his family. The Ambrose family was run according to very strict rules. Each family unit headed their own area or region and were not allowed contact with other parts of the family. There were severe consequences for anyone caught colluding with other families. Therefore, they were naturally very cautious about mixing. They only met at Thanksgiving and on Lincoln's birthday, when some of the less powerful members of the family finally had the opportunity to ingratiate themselves with the more important ones. Nathan's family were surrounded by admirers, which made them feel like stars. Nathan laughed and said hello to everyone in the family. Then he heard, "So, the villain Nathan has arrived. Suddenly I've lost my appetite." He turned around to see Justin glaring at him and holding up a cup of water. Some of the water had spilled onto his clothes. He complained, "Clearly it's bad luck to see Nathan. He's made me spill water all over my clothes." Alex said under his breath, "Be careful, Justin. Don't make Nathan angry. It's not worth it." Nellie asked, "Justin, I hate that man too. What did he do to upset you?" Justin generally ignored girls who were not good-looking, but he felt a natural affinity toward Nellie. He figured it was probably because she was such a good friend to Alex. He looked at Nathan and replied, "When I was a kid, he used to bully me and pretend to our parents that he hadn't done anything. Once he cracked my head open with a stone and refused to apologize to me. When he was a little older, he was smarter than most of our cousins. He always showed off in front of my grandfather and told him bad things about me. So everyone thought I was no good. I haven't seen him for 7 years, but seeing him now has made me remember how much I hate him. My blood is boiling. I really want to beat him up. After greeting other family members, Nathan approached Alex and said, "Alex, you really brought your whole harem to a family gathering. You've gotten so bold." When the 4 girls realized what Nathan meant, they wanted to get up and teach him a lesson. But Alex sent them a warning glance. They stayed seated but glared at Nathan. "Nathan, your face is still a little swollen," Alex commented. When Justin heard that and saw Alex and Nellie smiling, he guessed that they must be responsible for Nathan's bruises. He took the opportunity to laugh. "Yes, Nathan, why is your face so swollen? You usually look so handsome, but now you look like a beaten-up drunk." Nathan was angry, but he didn't react. He looked at them and sneered. "Okay, laugh now and have a little fun at my expense. I have a feeling that you won't be smiling for long this evening." He turned to walk away, but then paused, turned back and said, "Oh, forgot to tell you. I made a good friend in D.C. I think you know him too." They all followed Nathan's gaze toward the door and saw Colin Patterson standing there. Nathan motioned the security guard to let him in. Colin walked over. When he saw him, Alex felt as if his heart was being squeezed. He guessed that Nathan must know about the 1.5 million euros that he donated to the university. If he told their grandfather, his whole family would be in a lot of trouble, particularly his mother. "Aren't you going to say hello to your old classmate?" Nathan said to Colin with a smile. "Yes," Colin said, nodding at Alex and smiling. "Hello, Alex." Flora's heart started thumping rapidly. Alex's classmate. She looked at Nathan, smiling smugly, and she suddenly understood that Nathan knew all about the money she had given Alex. Her face froze. Alex looked at Colin but didn't say anything. Everyone was watching curiously, wondering why Alex and Flora seemed so uncomfortable with Nathan's friend. When he saw Alex's expression, Nathan felt smug. It was clear that Alex and Flora understood his motives for inviting Colin. Seeing their fear made his confidence soar. He said, "Well, we won't disturb your family any further. Let's go and sit down, Colin." He led Colin to his family's table. Gideon noticed Flora's anxious expression. He took her hand and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter?" Flora hadn't told Gideon about the money, but now she was worried that he would find out. She decided that she needed to let her husband know so that he could help her decide what to do. She took Gideon to a corner of the room where they wouldn't be overheard and told him what had happened. When he heard what she had done, he felt worried and angry. He frowned and whispered angrily, "Why didn't you discuss what you were planning to do with me before you did it? This was not a smart move, Flora." Flora was still convinced that she had done the right thing, and she was upset that her husband was scolding her so harshly. She replied, "I was so worried about how bad Alex's life was in school. If I discussed it with you, you wouldn't have let me do it. So I gave Alex the money in secret. You can scold me later, but now you must advise me what I should do." "Okay," Gideon sighed. He was trying to think about what they should do, but he couldn't find any way out of the situation. Alex walked over to them and said quietly, "Mom and Dad, relax. My grandfather's about to arrive. There's no way out of this, so I'll admit my mistake to him myself." Alex and his parents went back to the table and sat down. Justin and Nellie were relaxed and happily chatting with each other. When they saw Flora's face, Ken and Mark realized that something was wrong, but they didn't ask what it was. At that moment, everyone stopped talking, stood up and looked respectfully toward the front of the hall. Lincoln, the leader of the Ambrose family, had entered the hall at the front. He was wearing a bright blue designer suit, and he went and sat majestically on a large chair with his hands clasped in his lap. A thin man was standing behind him. Alex recognized him as the same man who had been with him on Harmony Island. The head of the family usually sat at a table with his closest family members, but the Ambrose family was large, and the relationships between the different facets of the family were very complex. So, to avoid upsetting anyone, Lincoln decided to sit alone. It was a family tradition that when he celebrated his birthday, representatives from each family would approach him to offer him food, drinks, or gifts. Sometimes he would walk around the room, spending a few minutes chatting to some of the families. The families that he chose felt very honored and knew that they must be his favorites. "Well, hello, everybody. Please sit down." Lincoln glanced around at everyone and felt a satisfaction that any old man would feel to have so many members of his family present to help celebrate his birthday. The crowd responded and took their seats. Next, representatives of each family took turns to present him with a birthday gift. There were more than 100 families or individuals wanting to offer birthday gifts, and the whole process usually took a couple of hours. Although slightly dull, it was a tradition and also an opportunity for Lincoln to greet the members of his family, and for them to show him their respect. It was an essential part of keeping the family dynamics on an even keel. At the same time, David's father, Reginald, had decided not to allow his son to have a wedding party or to consummate his marriage. There were many reasons for this. The ceremony had been severely disrupted when Alex burst in with his anguished declarations for Leona. When it was revealed that Alex was a member of the Ambrose family, Reginald began to worry that a union between his son and Leona might be a mistake. Alex might return with more support and object to the match again. He wasn't sure what to do, so he advised caution in the meantime. Every day, when David visited Leona, he remembered how beautiful she was. Although the ceremony had not been completed properly thanks to Alex, David still felt that he was already Leona's husband. But he couldn't kiss her or even touch her. It was driving him crazy. When he remembered how strong and rebellious Alex had been on the day of his wedding, he was too scared to do anything about it. "I'll quench my thirst with Martha tonight," David whispered to himself. Martha was the Drake family maid. As he couldn't spend the night with Leona, David was becoming increasingly frustrated, and he started secretly sleeping with Martha to satiate his passions and meet the needs that could not be met by his new wife. David was about to call Martha when the door of his room opened and a graceful figure walked in. When he saw who it was, he was stunned. It was Leona. Episode 248, The Truth. David put away his cell phone, looked at Leona and asked, "Leona, what are you doing here?" Leona sighed a little, sat down beside David and said, "We're husband and wife. Why shouldn't I come to see you?" Like David, Leona felt that their marriage was just as final as if the ceremony had been completed without interruption. Over the past 3 days, she had been worrying about the fact that she and David were sleeping apart. She thought he seemed very cold and awkward with her, and assumed that it was something to do with what his father, Reginald, had said to him. Leona didn't want to appear forward by inviting David to come to her room, but she felt very puzzled and anxious about the situation. That evening, she had spent a long time in her room thinking about it, and had finally decided that she needed to discuss everything with him. "David, has your father said something to you?" Leona decided to come straight out and ask him the question that was bothering her. David hesitated because he was unsure what to tell her. The truth was that his father was afraid that Alex would be angry with the Drake family because of Leona, so he had forbidden him to sleep with Leona. He thought, "How can I tell her the truth? She'll think I'm a coward." David took Leona's hand and said softly, "My father talked to me. He told me that although we're as good as married now, I still have to focus on my career. He was afraid that I would be too distracted by you. That's why I've been distant these last few days. Leona, do you hate me?" "Is that really all he said?" Leona asked softly. She had a feeling that things weren't as simple as David said. "Of course, how could I lie to you?" he replied. He rubbed her hand gently and looked at her small face, stunning eyes, long curled eyelashes, and snow-white neck. He thought that Leona was the most beautiful woman in the world. His heart skipped a beat, and he slowly stepped closer to her, hoping to kiss her plush lips. Leona's heart started to beat faster. She was worried that if she kissed David, things could get out of control. It would be her first time, and she didn't want it to happen like this. Just as he was about to kiss her, she said, "David, I'd like some coffee. Can you help me make some?" She wasn't ready. She needed to give herself a little time to prepare. "Of course. If you sit here, I'll go and make it." David was so impatient that he almost kissed her again. He knew that once they'd kissed, he could move things to the next stage, which he'd been anticipating for so long. For now, he had to contain his desire for a little longer. "You wait here and I'll make you a cup of coffee," he reiterated, then gave her a loving smile and walked out of the room. He walked into the kitchen and checked with Martha that his father was not currently at home. He was sure that he had gone to deal with the aftermath of the wedding, as he had done every day since his marriage. He couldn't help feeling happy about the situation now that Leona had come to see him. He had decided that he would consummate his marriage to Leona that night. He would simply make sure that she didn't tell his father. He thought, Leona is so uptight that she might be too reserved in bed. I'll ask the security guard to bring me some aphrodisiacs. He dialed the security guard's cell phone and asked him to send him some aphrodisiacs immediately. In David's room, Leona was sitting on the bed. Her heart was fluttering and her mind was confused. What would she do if David was too much for her? She thought, David saved me and we've experienced so much together. I do truly love him. And besides, he's my husband now. Of course he wants to sleep with me. It's perfectly normal. As she pondered over the situation, her cheeks blushed. Don't think about it too much, she warned herself. She saw a row of books on the desk. So, to distract herself, she walked over to look at them. She was interested to see what sort of books they were. She thought, I didn't know that David likes reading so much. I wonder what kind of books he reads. She picked up 2 books at random and saw they were both about business, so she put them down. Then, she noticed a battered little notebook amongst a row of neat books. It stood out, so she picked it up. When she saw the name Debbie written on the first page, something jolted in her memory. Debbie? That's the name of Alex's girlfriend. Why is her name on this notebook? Alex used to believe that I was his girlfriend. Is this notebook hers? She opened the first page and found that it was a diary. Leafing through the pages, Leona read about how difficult life had been for Debbie and all the unfortunate experiences that she had been through, and she was moved. She sympathized with Debbie and thought again about Alex. It was no wonder that he was so desperate to find her. She had been through so much. In her heart, her hatred for Alex lessened. Soon, she turned to the page dated April 2nd, the day that Alex and Debbie met for the first time. She read that Madison and her friends had humiliated Debbie in a restaurant, so she ran to Ramsey Lake. She was so desperate to end it all that she jumped into the lake. But before she drowned, a boy jumped in to save her. He told her that his name was Alex, and they ended up sitting on a rock eating risotto together. He gave her hope for the future. After reading about that day, Leona felt moved but also very puzzled. How could what happened between Alex and Debbie be similar to how she and David had met at Richmond University? Even the meal they had eaten was similar. Debbie and Alex had enjoyed risotto, while she and David had shared paella. Leona vaguely felt that something was wrong. She continued to read the diary. In the entry for April 13th, Debbie wrote that she didn't know why Alex wanted to steal money from Mr. Morgan. She hated him for that, but she knew she couldn't give up on him. She decided to leave school to work and get the money to pay back the school, feeling it was more important than even her own education. On April 17th, Debbie wrote that she had been eating corn and couldn't stop crying. It made her think of the time when her mother was sitting on the street selling corn, and she asked her to buy them hamburgers. She was furious with herself for having been so selfish. In the entry on April 20th, Debbie wrote that their school read out the top donations to the charity for the poor mountain village children that day, and the one who donated the most was Alex. When his ex-girlfriend tried to expose him, claiming that it wasn't his money, he gave another huge donation on the spot. On April 25th, Debbie had written that Alex had defended her in a restaurant. Someone attacked her, and he made them kneel on the ground and lick the floor. When they got back to school, Madison threw her in the water. Debbie feared for her life, but Alex saved her. He was seriously injured trying to protect her. In the end, his family sent a helicopter to rescue her. Leona became increasingly confused as she continued what to read. The events recorded in Debbie's diary were identical to things that had happened to her and David. She thought, if it was just one similarity, I'd call it a coincidence, but so many things are the same. How can that be? She looked back at the words in the diary and was overcome by a feeling of empathy, as if she was actually Debbie writing about herself in the diary. A complex feeling of melancholy and familiarity rippled through her body, and an image of Alex appeared in her mind. He was saying, "You are Debbie." Leona held her head in her hands and thought, "No, that can't be what's happening." Her head started to ache. The door opened and David walked in with a cup of coffee. Leona didn't know that he had already added the aphrodisiac to her cup. When he saw her standing at the desk looking at the diary, his heart trembled. He dropped the coffee cup on the ground and it shattered into pieces. "David, can you tell me what's going on? Why do you have Debbie's diary? And why is everything that happened to her now happening in exactly the same way to us?" Leona was anxious to know the truth, and when she saw David drop the coffee cup, she was even more certain that he was keeping something from her. Well, I just found that diary in the street. I found it entertaining to read, so I kept it. I've finished with it now, so I'll chuck it out," David replied. He walked over to the desk, intending to get the diary and throw it in the trash. But Leona quickly grabbed the diary, looking at David, and then ran out of the room. She was convinced that David was hiding something. She had started to think that maybe she really was Debbie. According to her diary, Debbie only knew her mother, and she had died a few months previously. If she was Debbie, then what relation was she to Charles Marvel? She had so many questions that she needed answers to. She felt she couldn't save her life until she found out who she really was. Leona left the house and took a cab to Arlington Heights. She wanted to confront her father and find out what he knew. When she arrived, she ran straight into his villa with the diary. "Leona, why are you looking so worried? What's going on?" Charles had been sitting on the sofa in his living room, thinking about how to grow the family business. "Leona, what are you doing back? Are you homesick?" Lindsay heard the noise and came out of her room. Leona stood in front of her father and asked, "Dad, are you hiding something from me?" Charles avoided making eye contact with her as he replied, "What are you talking about? I'm your father. What would I hide from you? You're tired and overwhelmed. Try to relax. Why don't you stay here tonight and rest?" Leona summoned up all of her courage and said, "Dad, I can tell you're lying to me. You are, aren't you? I need to know whether I'm really your daughter." If she really was Debbie, then her mother was a woman named Carla Clifton, and she had no father. Therefore, Charles couldn't be her real dad. "Leona, don't talk nonsense. How could I not be your father?" Charles answered hastily. Lindsay embraced her and said anxiously, "Leona, how could you ask Dad that? Of course you're my sister. Stop thinking such crazy things." Leona looked at her father and asked, "Dad, can you tell me who Carla Clifton is?" She was convinced that he was hiding something, and that it had to do with who she really was. She wanted to know what he was hiding. Carla Clifton. Hearing that name, Charles's heart skipped a beat. Has her memory come back? He wondered. He tried to calm down as he looked at Leona. His hands were clenching involuntarily. "Dad, I have the right to know my past. I will never be happy until I know the truth. Maybe one day I'll remember everything and then I'll hate you for not being honest with me. Please tell me who I really am. Am I really Debbie or not?" Charles was shocked. He realized that although her memory hadn't come back, Leona had already worked out a lot of what he had been keeping from her. It was clear that he could no longer hide the truth. He lowered his head, closed his eyes, and sighed. He was silent for a long time before he finally said, "Leona, you only arrived in our house 4 months ago." Episode 249, I Want Him Back. When she heard what her father said, Leona's legs became weak, and she almost fell to the ground. Lindsay supported her. She summoned the courage to ask, "Then I'm not your daughter?" She was afraid to hear the answer, but she also needed to hear the truth. "Yes, of course you are," Charles replied. Then he stood up and walked over to her. "Dad." She snuggled into his arms, relieved to learn that he really was her father. She didn't think she could bear it if he wasn't. Charles gently rubbed her back and said, "Oh dear. You may find the truth very difficult to accept. Do you really want to hear it?" "Yes, I want to hear it." She raised her head and looked at her father. "Even if it's upsetting, I need to hear it. I have to know what I've experienced. How can I feel complete unless I know who I am?" Charles sighed and stared into space, deep in thought. Then he said slowly, "Your mother's name is Cynthia Clifton, a young lady from the very important Clifton family in Baltimore. Your mother and I met each other in New York when we were both actors in a play, and we fell in love. We were together for 2 months when she fell pregnant with you, Although we loved each other, we weren't yet married. Leona was surprised when she heard that her parents had been in love. She had assumed that they had only had a brief affair. Charles continued. I wanted to marry Cynthia in New York, but she was afraid to tell her parents. I had no idea that she was from the Clifton family in Baltimore. I thought that she was from an ordinary family. She had told me that she wasn't really in touch with her family, so I let it go and didn't ask any more about them. We stayed together and I took care of her throughout her pregnancy. We were both looking forward to meeting you. Everything was fine until she had been pregnant for 9 months and was about to give birth. A group of people tracked Cynthia down and found us together in Baltimore. Only then did I find out that she was a member of the Clifton family. The head of the Clifton family, that is your grandfather, Jessup Clifton, heard that Cynthia was pregnant with my child and was furious. I thought that he was going to kill me. Luckily, Cynthia convinced him to spare me. But they locked me up in a room at the Clifton family estate. Cynthia was not allowed to visit me there. Every day a young maid brought me lunch. That maid was called Carla, and she would stay and chat with me for a while. She believed in me and Cynthia, you see. She believed in love and faith. I would ask her to send messages to Cynthia for me, and she would tell me what was going on in the house. She told me the child growing in Cynthia's belly was very restless to get out. After I had been locked up for about 10 days, Carla came to tell me that I had a daughter, and that Cynthia had named her Debbie. She also told me that Cynthia was planning to help me escape, so that we could run away together with the baby. Only then did Leona realize that her name was neither Leona nor Marvel. Her true name was Debbie Clifton. Charles continued. The day after the birth of the child, I was driven out by the Clifton family, but I stayed in Baltimore and secretly watched them. I believed that Cynthia would find a way to be reunited with me. His eyes became sad and his voice dropped as he said, However, it turned out that it was only Cynthia's death that I was waiting for. At the memorial service, the Clifton family said that I was responsible for her death. I asked Jessup where my daughter was. He pulled away from everyone else and told me that if I mentioned my daughter again, he would kill me. I could never disclose my relationship with Cynthia to anyone, or the Clifton family would have me killed and my family destroyed. I knew that he had the power to do such a thing, so I returned to New York. However, I remained convinced that my daughter was still alive, and I've been searching for her ever since. At first, I traced every baby I could find that didn't have parents, but that led nowhere. Later, with new advances in technology, I was able to use DNA tracing to search for her. I looked for over 20 years without finding her. So how did I end up back here? Leona asked. 4 months ago, a man called me out of the blue. He said that he had news about my daughter. I was shocked and rushed to meet with him. As soon as I arrived and saw you lying in bed, I knew that you were my daughter. You and Cynthia looked so much alike. More importantly, I could just feel that I was your father. You also had the Jade Phoenix pendant, which was your mother's. There is no doubt in my heart that you're my daughter. As Charles spoke, he looked at Leona with deep affection. The 2 people who sent you here are actually from the Clifton family. It was them who told me the circumstances of Cynthia's death. They told me that the Clifton family had wanted to kill our child. Cynthia and Carla Stonehill tried to flee with the baby, but were chased and forced to the cliff's edge by men working for the family. Cynthia jumped off the cliff and protected Carla and the child with her own body. Two particular members of the Clifton family never stopped looking for them. It was actually their search that led me to you. Leona lowered her head and started sobbing. Her mother had died to save her. "Please don't cry," pleaded Charles. He wiped away her tears, but he was unable to stop crying himself. He continued his story. "Cynthia had been very close to those two people before she died. Years later, when they found you, they knew that if they sent you back to the Clifton family, you would be killed. So they sent you to me. You had been seriously injured, so I sent you to the hospital. After 10 days, you woke up, but you had lost your memory." "Did they tell you anything else about my life before my accident?" Leona asked. She wanted to know all about Debbie. Was she really Debbie in the diary? "They only said that you had an accident at a hotel in New York. They didn't know anything else about you. The only other thing they told me was that on the night they found you in New York, there was an underground force looking for a girl named Debbie. Your name must have been Debbie before you lost your memory. Also, when you were in the hospital, you were wearing a necklace. The doctor had to remove it to treat you. When you woke up and we discovered that you had lost your memory, I thought that it would be better for you to not remember your past or your true identity. So I made the decision not to return the necklace to you, in case it triggered your memory. I kept it safe though, and I'll give it to you now." Charles walked to the study and quickly returned holding a necklace, which he held out to Leona. It was the octagonal diamond necklace that Alex had placed around Debbie's neck that day at the banquet that Graham Sterling had organized. Leona took the necklace and it felt very familiar to her. Some images flashed through her mind, but they disappeared too quickly for her to see clearly. It felt as if something was awakening in her brain. She sat at the table, picked up a pen and opened the diary. On the first page, under the word Debbie, she wrote Debbie. It was clear that the handwriting was identical. "Leona, this is your diary," Lindsay said in surprise. Leona didn't speak. She opened the diary again and looked at the words written inside. The images in her mind began to become clear. The girl who fell into Ramsey Lake was her. The man who saved her was Alex. The man who defended her when she was teased was Alex. He was also the one who rushed into the water to save Madison. Slowly, she started to remember singing with her band in the auditions. She remembered being with Alex and Justin on an island, and being at Preston University. Everything started to come back to her. She was Debbie. Alex was her boyfriend. Then she remembered what happened in D.C. Alex had been trying to bring back her memory. She had misunderstood his intentions and ended up breaking his heart. She started to feel very guilty about how she had treated him. She wanted to see him right then so that she could apologize to him and tell him that she still loved him, that she wanted to be his girlfriend again. She started sobbing and her body shook. She whispered to herself, I remember everything. I remember. I'm Debbie. He didn't lie. I'm his girlfriend." Lindsay saw that she was crying, and she was worried. She asked, "Leona, do you remember? Try to stay calm. It's good that you're starting to remember. Don't cry. Lindsay, I treated him so cruelly. I think I broke his heart. What should I do? He won't forgive me, but I miss him so much. I want him to come back to me. What can I do? Debbie sobbed even harder when she remembered her wedding day. Alex had held out his hand to her and begged her to choose him. Her heart was breaking when she thought about how much grief she had caused him. She would willingly exchange 50 years of her life to take back what had happened. She didn't care how much pain she was in. She never wanted to cause Alex sorrow again. I hate myself now for how I treated him. It was clear that he loved me, but I didn't see it. She couldn't stop crying. She was completely overcome with grief. He will forgive you. If you call him now and tell him that you remember everything, he'll be very happy, Lindsay advised. She had also missed seeing Alex over the last days, but she didn't have the courage to call him again. She knew that it was impossible for her and Alex to be together. She would be happy to see him with her sister. Debbie took out her cell phone, but stopped and considered what she was doing for a long time. It didn't matter how he reacted. She had to call him and tell him that she remembered everything. She hoped that he would forgive her and let her have another chance. She took a deep breath and called him. Meanwhile, at Lincoln's birthday party, only 3 families had not yet presented him with their birthday gifts. An older man, wearing a dark jacket, jeans, and sneakers, walked over to Lincoln. He was handsome, with the unruly look of a free spirit. Nellie and Justin were whispering to each other. When Nellie saw the man, she froze. Her eyes locked onto him, and her expression became very serious. When Lincoln saw the man approach, he stopped smiling, and his eyes became cold. Dad, I've brought you a string of Indian red sandalwood. The man was one of Lincoln's 9 sons, Tristan Ambrose. He gave the red sandalwood string to the person in charge of receiving the gifts and said a toast to Lincoln. I wish you a long and happy life. He stood in front of his father, waiting to be told that he could return to his seat. Although Tristan's gift of the red sandalwood string was valuable, it was nothing compared to some of the other gifts that Lincoln had received, such as jewels, designer watches, and famous paintings worth over $1 million each. In comparison, Tristan's gift wasn't very impressive. Although Tristan looked as if his only desire was to please his grandfather like everyone else, he was not sincere. His real motives were a long way from those that he portrayed. Episode 250, The Birthday Gifts. Lincoln looked at Tristan and told him, What would please me the most is for you to finally get married. He looked around at his other sons and daughters. Only Tristan had not married and produced grandchildren for him. Oh, Tristan said in a low voice. Remember that it was you who separated me from my one true love. Now you're urging me to get married again. What are you talking about? We are the Ambrose family. Do you really think I could let a woman like that join our family? Lincoln yelled. He was furious. His body was shaking and his face was contorted with rage. When he stopped speaking, the hall was quiet enough to hear a pin drop. Tristan wasn't concerned. He had been on the receiving end of Lincoln's fury many times before. "Just get out of my sight," Lincoln sighed. Today was his birthday party, and it was supposed to be a happy day. He didn't want to get angry. Tristan walked away and quietly sat back in his seat. Nellie whispered to Justin, "Who is he? Why does he seem to resent your grandfather?" "He's one of my uncles, and my grandfather wants him to get married, but he's refusing," Justin whispered back. He didn't elaborate. Nathan approached Lincoln with his birthday gift of a jade sculpture of the Longevity Star. He explained that the base was made of high-quality agar wood. The Longevity Star was sculpted from the best white jade, golden silk jade, and jadeite. It had taken an older, expert craftsman 2 years to create. Although Nathan didn't mention the value, everyone was astute enough to know that it was worth at least $5 million. The Ambrose family had always specially sought out such rare treasures, and it was the perfect gift for Lincoln's birthday. He was extremely happy. His face softened and he looked very satisfied with his gift. "Nathan, you're such a good grandson," he said. When Nathan had finished the poverty training and had returned to his family, Lincoln met with him 3 times. He felt that Nathan had matured. He had tested him by letting him handle several business dealings with a total value of over $1 billion, and he had been impressed with how Nathan had handled them. Nathan looked at Lincoln and said sincerely, "Well, grandfather, I have not been here to celebrate your birthday for 7 years. I feel bad about this, and I promise that in the future, I will make up for the birthday gifts that I've missed." Lincoln was moved by Nathan's words. He said, "Good boy. I'm aware that during your 7 years of poverty training, you suffered bullying and discrimination. Do you really not feel any hatred toward your grandfather for that?" Using his family's intelligence agencies, Lincoln had maintained a good understanding of what Nathan and Alex had each gone through during their poverty training. He knew that Nathan had been bullied and despised by countless people. From junior high school to university, he had been a poor loser in the eyes of all his peers. The pampered young men who he had been surrounded by had found him despicable. "No," Nathan answered. He shook his head and said with a smile, "Grandfather, you're wrong. How could I hate you? On the contrary, I'm very grateful for that experience. It gave me an understanding of the hardships suffered by menial workers. Our wealth comes from their toil. Because of this, I will always respect them. This is what you hoped I would learn from the training, isn't it?" "Yes, it seems that you really understood the lessons from the training," Lincoln nodded, with his eyes full of pride and joy. Nathan's words had touched his heart. "Grandfather, Alex is also back. You must have missed him very much," Nathan said. He looked at Alex's table and said, "Alex, come and present a gift to your grandfather." Lincoln looked over to Alex. 3 days ago, Nathan had told him that Alex was willing to give up Leona, and as a result, he had lifted the restrictions from him. He was very happy that after 7 years, his 2 favorite and most respected grandchildren were both there to celebrate his birthday. Alex approached him with the gift that his parents had prepared. Lincoln smiled as he watched him approach. Once Alex settled back into the Ambrose family, Lincoln planned to give him some businesses to take care of worth of billions of dollars to see how he handled them, just as he had with Nathan. He had every confidence in Alex. because he believed that he had always shown himself to be an intelligent and responsible young man. Alex and Nathan were his hopes for the future of the Ambrose family. As Alex presented him with an exquisitely crafted European painting portraying the Sabine women of Roman myth, Lincoln nodded. He really didn't care what Alex gave him. It was enough that he was there on his birthday. Good boy. I'm so happy that you're back," he told him. Although he would have liked to continue chatting with his grandchildren, there were traditions that had to be followed. So he looked at Alex and Nathan, raised his hand, and told them they should return to their seats. Nathan suddenly stopped Alex and said, "Alex, hang on a minute." Alex's heart tightened. He looked at Gideon and Flora, who were sitting nearby with anxious expressions. They all realized what Nathan was going to say next. "Nathan, is there something else?" Lincoln realized that something was wrong. "Yes, grandfather," he replied. He looked at Lincoln, lowered his head respectfully, and in his serious voice said, 3 days ago in D.C., I found something out about Alex that I feel I need to report to you." "What's the matter?" asked Lincoln. He looked very serious when he realized that this wasn't something trivial. He glanced at Alex, hoping that he had not done anything to show disrespect to their family traditions. "I found out that Alex had donated €1.5 million to the Richmond University New Year's party, and that the money had been given to him in secret by his mother," Nathan exclaimed. Anyone in the hall fell into shocked silence. Although it was a small sum of money, the fact remained that he had used this money during his time away, when contact or funding had been forbidden. If his mother really had given him the money, then their rules had been violated. According to the Ambrose family traditions, any acts of defiance were punished severely. Lincoln felt that for the Ambrose family, taking away money or demoting someone's status in the family were not punishment enough. He believed that physical pain was the most suitable punishment. His face darkened, and he asked in a deep voice, "Is there any evidence?" Usually, when a family member made a mistake, Lincoln would not ask for evidence. Instead, he would question the accused party directly, confident that they would tell the truth. No one in the Ambrose family dared to lie to Lincoln. Now, however, he did not ask Alex directly. He wanted to give himself some time to think. Nathan was unsettled. He noticed that his grandfather's approach to the issue this time was unusual. This was the clearest evidence he had ever seen that his grandfather preferred Alex. "Yes, I have evidence," he answered. He turned and looked at Colin, who was sitting nearby. Colin stood up nervously and walked up to Lincoln. Nathan said, "Colin, please tell my grandfather honestly everything you know." "Yes," Colin replied timidly. He felt inconsequential in front of the Ambrose family, so he lowered his head, and with as much respect in his tone as he could muster, he said, "I am also a student at Richmond University. I'm here to tell you that Alex definitely donated €1.5 million to the New Year's party over a month ago. I was there and took a photo that I can show you." Colin opened his cell phone and found the photo of the party. The photo showed the president thanking Alex for the money and a big screen behind them described what was happening. Colin showed it to Lincoln. He told everyone that a middle-aged lady took pity on him when he was making pancakes and gave him the money, Colin added. Lincoln stared at the photo on the screen. Then he slowly lifted his eyes and glared at Flora. Flora jolted and knocked over a cup that was on the table in front of her. The cup rolled to the ground and smashed into pieces. She stood up quickly and walked over to Lincoln, kneeled on the ground in front of him, and said in a trembling voice, "Lincoln, I admit I made a mistake. I gave Alex the money. Please punish me." Gideon also walked over to Lincoln, kneeled down beside Flora and said, "Dad, it was actually my idea. I didn't want my son to suffer any longer, so I asked her to give him the money so that he would have the opportunity to return home. I take full responsibility." Flora was surprised by Gideon's words. She was touched that her husband had chosen to take the blame for her actions. For a moment, she felt proud to be married to such an honorable man, but she knew that she couldn't let her husband take responsibility. It would ruin his future. "No," Flora started to explain to Lincoln that she had acted on her own, and that it had nothing to do with her husband. But Gideon pulled her back and gave her a look to be quiet. Flora was moved, and tears welled up in her eyes. When Lincoln understood what was going on between his son and daughter-in-law, he was unsure what to do next. He looked back at Alex, who felt terrible, and also kneeled down with his parents. He felt that it had been his mistake, so he should be the one to be punished. Lincoln knew that all the families were watching him. He felt he had to give a fair and strict judgment. Otherwise, everyone would lose their respect for him and for the family traditions. Lincoln looked at the family kneeling in front of him and called out, "Dexter, come here. Tell me, how should I punish this kind of behavior?" A middle-aged man quickly walked over. It was Dexter Ambrose, Lincoln's main advisor and an expert in Ambrose family traditions. He was not a direct descendant of the Ambrose family, but he was an honorary member. He held a lot of responsibility, and in order to demonstrate his loyalty to Lincoln, he had officially changed his surname to Ambrose. Dexter walked over to Lincoln, gave a small bow out of respect, and then looked at Alex's family. He said loudly, "According to Ambrose family traditions, anyone who openly violates family restrictions or helps other family members to do so should be punished. Their position should be reduced by 1 level. They should also test their strength and endurance in combat for 15 minutes. There was a hushed exclamation from the rest of the family. It was a severe punishment that could be devastating for Gideon's family. In the competition between Alex and Nathan to take over as head of the family, this would set Alex far behind his cousin. It would also take his family a long time to recover their good reputation with Lincoln and the rest of the Ambrose family.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.